Hello and welcome to another episode of the AnxietyRX Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Russ Kennedy. Here on the AnxietyRX Podcast, we discuss the science and the art of healing from anxiety because it's not all science. There is a lot of spirit involved in healing from anxiety, which I think the scientific community doesn't quite recognize yet. And today, I have Michelle with me who has read my book and has done my MBRX program, and it's helped her. So as the new book has come out, she's actually into the new book, which is great because I get to ask her some questions about that. But welcome, Michelle.
Hi, thanks for having me. It's so great to be here. And I'm also very nervous. It's you.
No worries.
Oh my God.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, it's just like, that's just one of the things that happens when we go on these things. I used to be really nervous about anything. Airplanes, sounds like a Faulty Towers episode, airplanes, doorknobs, confined spaces, open spaces, all that stuff. And it's funny how, the way we feel internally reflects everything. We get, and I talk about the social engagement system in the book, right? Like eye contact, tone of voice, positive voice, body language, facial expression, how important that is in interacting. And then when we get nervous, that we lose that social engagement system. So usually what happens when I talk to people is the first few minutes are, they're a little edgy, and then we sort of get into it. And I kind of have a calming influence on people, I like to think. So we'll just, wherever you want to go. Like we talked a little bit about before you went on about your career and how you got pushed into that by your family. So maybe that's a decent place to start. So what kind of work do you do and why do you hate it?
So I work as an internal auditor, and I'm imagine somewhere at some point, somebody I work with will probably see this podcast.
Okay.
And they'll be laughing because I'm like, well, of course you hate it. Like I've been hating it for 12 years. Yeah. Like it's awful. It's like the worst career you can imagine. It's like watching paint dry every day and hoping that it dries in a different color, right? Like, oh, it's blue today, but maybe by the end of the day it'll be green, right? And it's not green. I got into this job when I was a little kid. I wanted to be a detective. That is all I ever wanted to do. I wanted to solve crimes. I wanted to solve puzzles. That was my thing. And I was majoring in several things. I was a criminology major. I was a criminal justice major. I was a forensics major. And my family just kept being like, there's just no money in this. You're not very good at this. And I'm like, well, says who? I don't know that I totally agree with that. And eventually the pushing just got harder and harder. It was like, you need to get a business degree, just go do these things, work a good job, get steady income. The stress is going to be too much for you, blah, blah, blah. It was always something. And I had lost most of my sense of identity. It was completely fractured. I had no connection with self. So it was like, okay, fine, I'm going to do it. But with my family, love and care was always transactional. So it was like, this is how it would go down. It'd be like, well, hey, my grandparents, they moved to Nevada. There's a lot of backstory there. They ultimately were the ones that raised me. My mom and dad were not in the picture. My dad has been in the picture much later in life. My mom is deceased. And they were raising me and, they called the shots. And it was like, hey, we're going to move to Nevada. If you move to Nevada with us, we'll pay for you to go back to school and finish, because I'd been kind of in and out of college and was like, look, if I can't do what I want to do, I'm not going to keep going.
Yeah.
And so I quit a bunch of times, worked a full-time job, moved a whole lot, got married way too young, had no idea what I was doing. And it finally got to a point where it was like, okay, they said, we'll come back to Nevada. We'll pay for you to go to school. So I went there and I finished, my associate's degree. And then it was like, oh, well, that's all we're going to pay for. And it was like,
pull the sheet. Now you're in Nevada. Now you're in Nevada
exactly.
And you got nothing. Yeah.
Got nothing.
You're trapped.
And it was like I lived in Reno. It was like the worst place you could ever live. I know. It's horrible.
Like Tahoe's nice, but Reno.
Yes. Tahoe's great, but Reno, not so much. So
yeah.
I thought, all right, now what am I going to do? So then they decide, oh, we're going to move to Texas. And I'm like, okay, because my mom was living in Texas with her husband. And I think they just wanted to be closer. My Nana was getting old. Everybody was, both grandparents were really getting old, but my Nana was really not well. And I said, fine. So I packed up my car and I left Reno. I drove to Austin and she died a week later. My Nana passed away. Yeah, totally. I mean, not totally shocking to me. She'd been very ill, but it was fast. And we did not find out until she'd even passed that she had stage 4 brain cancer.
Oh, wow.
So
okay.
we found that her test results actually came in the Monday after she passed away. So I'm in Texas. My Nana's just passed. My granddad's beside himself. My mom's a mess, I'm like trying to hold everybody together because that's all my job ever was. Let's manage everyone else's emotions.
How old were you at that time?
Oh, I was 25.
Okay.
So pretty young. 25. Yeah. I'll be 41 next month.
Okay.
So it was quite a while ago. And we all got on a plane, flew back to Reno, went to the funeral and all that. And then I come back and I'm like, now what? And even the people pleasing was still entrenched then because my granddad was still pushing the get a business degree. Right. It's easy, blah, blah, blah. So I did that. I went and got a bachelor's degree in management. And the first job I got out of college was an audit job working for the state of Texas. And people I was working at a credit union at the time, and they all told me, don't do it. It's awful. You're going to be bored. You have too much personality for this. Like, this is never going to work. Already.
Yeah, you don't have an auditor's personality, Michelle. Like,
I don't. Like, not at all. Like, I'm very much like a people person. Like, no, I don't want to work hiding in an office. Well, I remember just to turn it back to me because everything's about me. But I remember doing this thing when I was like 18, 19. I didn't know what the hell I was going to do with my life at that point. I had no idea had the ability to be a doctor. So I went and did, at the time they had this thing called the Unemployment Insurance Commission here in Canada. And you could write these aptitude tests. So I did these aptitude, and they were fairly in depth, So the thing that they came up with was accounting for me. It was like, and everybody was saying, like, because I'm a buffoon, like I'm an idiot, like I do stupid things all the time. Like if we're in the grocery store with me and my wife, I'm knocking stuff, like not stuff that'll break, but stuff off the shelves to make her laugh. And so, accountant, really? So it's just so funny how we pay attention to the sort of almost patriarchal structures. I hate using that word, but the structures that have been laid down, we sort of stay in these things and we think, well, this is the safer bet. And then I went through, as we were talking about before, we started recording, I went through medicine and I was like, geez, I got out of medicine. It's like, this is not for me. Like I made it through because I can't quit anything, but I made it through. And then I practiced for like 15 years or something like that. And then it was like, I can't do this anymore. And then it's funny how it starts to rot you from the inside. It's like the old thing about the frog in the boiling water. You throw a frog in boiling water. Like, I don't recommend this and I don't think it's real, but you throw a frog and he jumps out right away. But if you put him in like lukewarm water and you turn the heat up slowly, he'll die in there. And it's kind of reminding me when you're talking about just sort of having no way out. Yeah. And so fast forward through a lot of pain, a lot of misery, I get a call October 19th, 2021, from my stepdad. My mom had passed away.
Oh, okay.
She was 65.
And how old were you, Michelle, when she passed?
Oh, I was 37 at the time. Almost 38. Yeah, it was right before or maybe I was 36.
Okay.
Something, around 36, there. 37, something like that. And I wasn't shocked that she passed away. More kind of, her and I's relationship was tumultuous, to say the least.
Right.
So I felt a lot of relief, to be honest.
Yeah, you're turning back to me, and like I don't want to, but basically, that's when my dad started going really schizophrenic. Like when I was in my like late 19, 20, and then he committed suicide when I was 25 or 26. There was this sense of relief, and there's so much of a guilt there of feeling relief that your parent had died, and it was just because he was suffering so much, right? And he was just getting worse. It was, and you were saying that
she was too.
Yeah, you went through her place and it was just full of medications and stuff.
Oh yeah, the house was it was disgusting. The dogs were in complete poor health. My stepdad was, well, I didn't know it at that time, was developing dementia. And I was, then I come to find out that she had no will. So I had to go through this lengthy court battle with my stepdad. And then that court battle sort of got halted because the judge was like, he's not fit. And we're like, I know he's not fit. Like, he needs a guardian.
No kidding.
So the state like appointed him a guardian. And then like there was this long 2-year negotiation between his estate and my estate, my mom's estate, trying to clean up all that stuff. But that is when, I will tell you, that's when the floodgates, that's when it broke.
That's when your anxiety really hit you?
I couldn't sleep. I had anxiety. I had this knot in my solar plexus, like, horrible. Couldn't sleep, wasn't eating, lost a ton of weight. left the abusive relationship that I was in. So it was like, okay, I'm not playing anymore. I just, nothing was working. Moved out on my own, got divorced, bought a house, which I wish I hadn't have done, but that's another story for another day.
Okay.
But anyway, I'm still 12 years later, I'm still stuck in this job, and I am slowly dismantling layer by layer where the anxiety is coming from.
Right.
Like where in the depth of that. For me, it's mostly grief driven.
Yeah.
Like the top layer is always something top, right? It's like, oh, I'm angry. But then when I sit with the anger long enough, now we're in the mud. We're in the grief down here. We're in the bad stuff. We're in the lost opportunities. We're in the choices not made. We're in the layers of myself that were never self-actualized.
Right.
And the grief that comes from that, right? So you not only have the grief of like the life you never had, you have the grief of the life you have. And so I've spent a lot of the last year just trying to move on from this job because it's causing me the most of my anxiety is centered around this misalignment of my career. And this really, that becomes that separation from self, right?
Yeah,
it's like,
totally.
It's like the anxiety is like in my head about this job, but it's like truly in my body. My body's like, this is not for me. This is not mine. I don't want this. And of course, in the US right now, the job market is atrocious. So I put in over 200 applications and I've had almost, a few interviews and no offers. And I'm like, I don't know what to do at this point. So I'm still trapped in this job.
I do a lot of my work intuitively too, right? And it's just like, the message I keep getting for you is that there's this, there's an opening up for you. Like, it's almost like an hourglass, right? Like you're in the squeezing part of the hourglass right now, but it is going to open up for you, not to be kind of like, oh, don't worry, everything's going to be fine. But I do see,
no, I hear you.
I do see when people make changes energetically, the world actually starts to, it shifts. And and I've seen that in my life so many times. I'm doing this thing now where I have this, I'm not allowed to complain anymore inside myself. And I realize how much I freaking complain about stuff. It's just the internal monologue of complaints that come up every day.
It's a trauma thing.
Yeah.
That's a trauma. You get it. I get it.
For sure.
It's part of we're wired that way. We're wired to complain internally. Our inner critic or inner whoever has got something to complain about on any given day at any given time.
And it also makes sense. Like your brain is a meaning-making, make sense machine. So if in your body you're feeling this angsty, grief, whatever, and that's a whole other topic we should probably talk about because so much of anxiety is unresolved grief. But I remember being at this resort with my friend years ago, and it was just this beautiful. It was in Huatulco, Mexico, and it was a Club Med at the time, and there 975 New Yorkers came in, and we were enjoying ourselves before that. And then the New Yorkers are walking around going, it's so sunny and hot. I hate that. These drinks, these drinks are so good. I hate that. Like they were just, it was almost like a Saturday Night Live sketch, but it's just like how much our internal state is reflected by our mind and how much awareness we can draw around. So this is why I'm in this sort of no complaints October. Like I'm building myself up to it. It's like, I'm so used to kind of looking at the negative because it was so familiar for me and so familiar for so many of, in our childhoods. It wasn't a time of peace or calm. And the worst part of that is when it was calm for a while with my dad, and my dad was never abusive or violent. He was actually quite loving and playful when he was mentally sane. But when he went off, the whole house just, went into complete, wreck. So I got used to I coupled peace with trauma because I knew it was coming, right? Like I knew. So, and this is true with a lot of family of alcohol abuse issues, is that there's a big blow up. Then there's the alcoholic goes, oh, I'm sorry. It goes quiet for a while and then it blows up again. And I see that with a lot of my anxious people who had alcoholic parents, is that they don't trust safety. And if you don't trust safety, you're never going to heal from anxiety. Like it's just
okay. Yes.
Okay, you go.
This is a great topic.
You go now.
Okay. So my mom was if you ever heard of the book called Mother Hunger, I don't remember the name of the author, but she she goes into what she calls third degree mother hunger, right? Which is essentially where I come from, which is a absent mother, a abusive mother, and an alcoholic mother.
Jesus.
So all three, right? Yeah, exactly.
Whoa, everything is bigger in Texas. There you go. Okay.
And, you know, God rest her soul, but she was this push-pull dynamic with her. She would be available at one point and then completely unavailable, and then available and then unavailable. And that relational blueprint left me with the most extreme disorganized attachment you could. I mean,
of course.
My attachment patterning it's one of the areas that I know is like my next big thing to heal in life. But it's so terrifying because my relational track record has been so terrible that I'm almost afraid to like try again.
Understandably so, right? But and I hear this a lot too, like once you do start connecting with yourself, like I would say anxiety, and I say this in just about every podcast, anxiety is a separation from your adult self and your child self and your mind and your body. You go up into your mind, you live in your head, time flies because there's no grounding in your head. And the adult doesn't want to visit the child because the child holds all their pain. And the child is looking up to the adult and it's going, why are you leaving me alone for so long? So it's that split. So when we have that split, it's very, very difficult to form a relationship with other people when we are so split internally. But when we do start forming that relationship with ourselves, it's a whole freaking new world. Like we just start, then you start doing things like, I'm not complaining for the month of October. Like you just start going like, this is how, and things just naturally, they're either getting worse or getting better. And I think if you can use your awareness, like I say in the ABCs in the book, it's like, use your awareness, go into your body, get out of your head, because your head, you're not going to find it there. You're not going to find peanut butter in a tree. It's not going to be there. So it's being able to find, how can I connect with myself? And sometimes there's an intermediate period there where you do have to start processing the grief because you've been off balance for so long that your body and mind haven't had the luxury of processing the grief. So there is this sort of 2 or 3 stage thing. And this is why I see, you know, in my mind with you, this sort of hourglass thing where you're kind of in the crucible of it right now, or kind of coming out of it actually, and it's moving into this place of expansion, which carries its own, you know, when things start going well again, there's this, okay, when's the other shoe dropping? Because that's exactly what happened to me as a child. Like it would go okay for a while and then it would just go to shit again.
Yeah. I was a semi-professional figure skater for most of my life.
Oh, wow.
And it was you know, I'm thankful that I had it because I swear that was the only reason that I did not end up on drugs or pregnant at 16 or an alcoholic was I had a sport that kept me both sides of my brain entertained because my brain is very active. I like to be scientific with things. I like to think through things at a very like deep level. To me, it's like, if we're just talking about our thoughts, we're not even anywhere in the right ballpark yet. We need to get like deeper into that. We need to go down because like with anxiety, it's never just the anger. It's the sadness or that's just a starter spot. Right. And like, I don't know if you're familiar with Cheryl Paul. She does a ton of work around anxiety.
Yeah. I read her book, The Wisdom of Anxiety. It's a great book.
It's so good. She talks about the cut through question. She's like, what is my anxiety trying to protect me from? And that coupled with the ABCs and to circle back to our like previous segment conversation about safety, having a place of safety, right? I'd never had one.
Right.
And when I first started some of the modalities you talked about in the book, IFS, I tried EMDR, not that it was specifically mentioned, but EMDR did not work for me. And I didn't know at the time, but after reading Mother Hunger, she talks about exactly why it doesn't work. It's because when you're a child who's had, you know, no safe place to go to, and you talk about this in the new book, right? There's no, was it chapter 16 or whatever, where you're talking about we had no safety, right? There was no safe place to go. When it's not safe
to feel safe,
Right. So every time we try to do EMDR, they'd be like, well, imagine your safe place. And I kept telling this therapist, I don't have one. There isn't one.
Right.
And so she's like, well, just imagine a place that, and I thought this beach that my Nana and I used to go to in Maui. But then that always felt manufactured to me. It didn't feel real. It was like, no, I don't, like, I'll try. And so the EMDR didn't work. Yeah. It just had no effect. So then I switched over and I worked with an IFS coach for a while. And that was somewhat helpful.
Right.
But for me, when I do see myself as multiplicity, right? But for me, which approach worked better was referring to them as inner kids, inner teenager, younger adult version of me, because the parts for me are very abstract. Like when I see them in my mind, they're like these little Gumby figures. They're like black, gray, and white. And they were almost depersonalized. And I'm like, I don't want to see them this way. So I refer to them as like the inner shell, the little shell, the 8-year-old shell. There's 20-year-old shell, 35-year-old shell. There's all these different shells, right? So that helped me get a little bit further into the bubble, right? But then it was like, okay, I was kind of hitting a stalemate there too. Nothing was moving. I'm like, okay, I need to try something else. So last summer I tried brain spotting. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
No, I am. Yeah.
And wow, was that the gateway? And I've not done psychedelics, but some of the experiences that you describe are similar to that sort of out of body. You're now, it's like you're in the therapy room. They're moving the spot around. You're trying to get locked in and you you jump. There's a spot. Okay. And then it's almost like the room turns like this rainbow color and you are completely out of your body. And then all of a sudden you have all these memories come forward that have never been there before. You have thoughts and patterns that are presented and you're like, oh my God. And I would say probably the first 5 sessions of that was the most profound grief I have ever felt in my entire life. Because people talk about, oh, you need to do the work. And it's like, well, you know what? I see that all the time everywhere. But why don't you actually tell people what the work involves?
Right.
The work is sitting in a room or wherever, however you decide to do it, and sitting there and being like, you know what? Right now, Dr. Kennedy, I'm really angry. And sitting with the anger long enough until it morphs into what it truly is, which is whatever's below that, grief, sadness, whatever the lower tier is of that. And then when you get down, that's the mud. That's the part with anxiety. That's the alarm, right? Like that's the piece that we're trying to get to heal. And that's the hardest part to get to, because people are like, oh, I'm just mad. So I'm going to sit with my anger. And I'm like, it's not your anger.
Yeah.
You got to go. You got to go down.
It's a reasonable start to be aware that, okay, I'm angry, but anger is sort of a secondary emotion in a way. And the other thing about anger is it's a protective emotion, not rage, but anger is a protective emotion.
Right.
So again, it's kind of, the icing on the cake. It's the icing's tasty, but you're actually not getting into the cake. Right. And but it could be the pathway if you allow it to be. Because I think that's much of anxiety, is this state of alarm that's held in our body that's been there since we were younger. And I talk about that, from a neuroscientific perspective. I believe that the amygdala and this part of our brain called the insular cortex, which is deep in the center of our brain, which is kind of like the way station between, top down, mind to body and body to mind. And I think when we're younger, we create this sense, this emotional signature in this part of our brain, the insula, which takes us back. So if you had someone yelling at you, a parent yelling at you when you were 8 years old, and that carried on, you go back to that 8-year-old. Like the insula, the amygdala has no sense of time. Neither does the insula in a lot of ways. So when you feel this certain way, your amygdala goes, oh, I recognize this. This is what happened when we were getting abused when we were 7, 8, 10 years old. It doesn't, but you don't recognize it. Like you don't recognize it at the time, but you go into that same energetic, bodily sensation. And of course, all the thoughts that are consistent with that are negative. So those negative thoughts just accentuate the alarm in the body, and the alarm accentuates the negative thoughts. So we get in this loop that we can't get out of because we don't realize that anxiety isn't one thing. It's not your mind. It's your body that's starting it, and your mind is kind of trying to create it. I was talking to my own therapist yesterday, but this is like, all this stuff is really about how much can we use our conscious mind to start changing these unconscious programs that are in our body. And it takes a while. When I see these things on Facebook or whatever, it's like, cure your anxiety in 2 days. It's like, no, it's like if I told you, if I said, I'm going to get you to unlearn riding a bike, that these memories, these things in our body that mediate this alarm and this anxiety, they've been in there for a long time, and they become this well-oiled machine. And also what Cheryl Paul was saying is we have this illusion that they are protective. This anxiety is protecting me, so I don't want to let it go. So there's all these layers on top of it. And you're right. I think just staying, a lot of people, it's like, I get them to stay with that feeling of alarm. We localize it in the body. And it's like, okay, can we stay with it? But we don't sit in it and wallow in it. We kind of go, okay, now let's go into our breath for a second. Let's go into something else, because what we're doing is we're kind of giving it a bit of a lobotomy in a way. It's like we're allowing the alarm to be there and feeling it, but we're also coming out of it too. We're not just sort of sitting there and thinking, okay, if I just stay in the mud, that the mud's going to get better. Now, for some people that might work, but for most people, we need to provide some safety. And again, with in your situation is not unusual at all. It's like, I never felt safe. Like when people would ask me that, and in my 20s, when I went through all these, kind of therapies, ACT, CBT, HIJK, LMNP, all this stuff, they would say, well, where do you feel safe? It's like, I don't think I've ever felt safe,
Right.
So,
and it never works. CBT never worked for me. Ever.
Yeah. And well, here's the thing. Because I have theories on everything. CBT is basically using your rational mind to try and override the emotional body.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So when we get into survival physiology, norepinephrine in the brain, epinephrine in the body, cortisol in the body, we shut off the rational part of our brain, which houses the CBT. So what happens is that it leaves us when we need it the most. So that's my issue. Now, if you practice CBT over and over and over and over again, you're likely to be able to remember parts of it when you go into the mud. But it's usually something that just drops you down so deeply into this sort of primal fear that you lose your rational brain, you lose your prefrontal cortex. So why are we trying to use our prefrontal cortex when it's offline? That was my rant.
Yeah. I will tell you this, to take what you said one layer more with, if you're working with clients, right, is for me, if I hadn't done the IFS work, if I hadn't gone through the unburdening process, and if people aren't familiar with internal family systems, they go to look at it, there's really like a series of questions that we go through with our parts. And part of that is we drill down, we get safety enough with the parts where we can unburden, the exiles or the protected parts or the manager parts, right? Just to get real technical about those terms. Yeah. But for me, what I did was when I didn't love, I went through IFS training and was like, okay, this is really cool. I want to do something with this. But then I realized, it wasn't, I had to change that modality. I had to take in other modalities with it for it actually to work for me. So to get to your point about when you're working with a client and you don't want them to stay in the muck too long because it may be the most unsafe place for them. What I started doing is in these brain spotting sessions, as I'm talking through what I'm seeing in my mind or what I'm feeling in my body, because there's always memories that come up. It's always some memory. It'll be a smell, a place, something totally random, right? And I start speaking those things out. But as I'm telling the therapist what's going on, I've built enough capacity to work with the inner child at the same time. It's like, hey, I see you. Because really the unburdening in IFS is witnessing. How we heal is the witnessing, right? So if we're in it with that client, we really want them to be heard. We have to witness them. And so it's like my therapist, it's like, when I'm in that brain spotting session, I'm like half out of my mind. I don't even know what's going on, but I see her face and it's like, I trust her face. And so it's like, okay, she's safety in the room, but I'm creating safety in me by sitting in this pain and being like, I see you. I hear you. I love you. You're safe. I want you to express all the things you need to express now. This is your stage. This is your place. Go. You're okay. And after a while, it works, but I could not have gotten to that point, even in brain spotting, or would I have even known that had I not done the IFS work. So you need a lot of different modalities. Yeah,
I'm a big fan of IFS work as well. It's like I'm trained in SE, which is kind of like my little sentence that I often say is like, SE goes very deep into the body, but doesn't sort of itemize the parts.
Okay.
Whereas IFS itemizes the parts, but they don't go that deep into the body. So it's kind of like, if I had my way of kind of a magic wand of like squashing them together, it'd be like, let's go into the managers, the exiles, all this sort of stuff with IFS, but also use the insula, link that into a place in the body. Like where do you feel that? Because that's where you anchor things. And I think that's where we process things, because we're trying to process this stuff unconsciously. And, the best route to do that is through your body, because as soon as you get the conscious mind in there, you miss it. Like there's this analogy that I draw, like if you're out, in an area where there's not a whole lot of ambient light at night, and you look at a far, far, far away white star, and you look right at it, it disappears. Because what happens is, if you look at the way the retina, the back of the eye is formed, there's a place called the fovea, which is right in the middle, which is where we naturally focus our vision. Now, the fovea only has color. You can only process color because it only has cones, whereas the rest of the retina has rods and cones. Now, rods detect black and white, whereas the fovea only detects color. So if you direct your central vision at a very, very distant white star, it disappears. So the analogy that I'm drawing very, very elaborately and long is that when you look directly at something, it's there, but you can't see it.
Yeah. And I think for me, you actually hit it right there. I could not figure out why IFS was not going deep enough. And it's because for me, there's too much subconscious stuff going on. There was like too much current brain on. It was like I couldn't turn it off because it was like I'm using that to like engage the parts.
Exactly.
But like that's too brainy. It doesn't work because now the body was getting bypassed, right? So with brain spotting, it goes right to that part of the brain that you're talking about, and that's the access point, right? That's where you you put the key in and you unlock it, and you're like, oh, here we go, like we're about
the roller coaster. As the roller coaster
here
goes up, it's just like it starts to crest. It's like there's no getting off this thing. I'm on it now.
It's like once you start one of those sessions, man, I swear if that's close to being on drugs, that it's got to be close, because I swear it's like the whole room is vibrating.
Yeah,
it's the when you're floating, and like it's nuts. It's the wildest thing ever. I love it. Like if my goal is at some point is to become a therapist. That's what I want to do.
I think that's where you're going.
Yeah,
that's where I'm going. I get that message a lot. Is that I think that's where you're going, because I mean, that's what I did too. I used that 40 years of pain of anxiety, and then I used my background in neuroscience and developmental psychology and medicine. I was like, okay, so the thing about me is I can describe the bed nucleus of the striatum terminalis. I can describe the basolateral amygdala and how you can extinct phobias through that. I can describe all that stuff, but really what it comes down to is we're mind, body, spirit. And I think what, organized psychiatry, psychology, whatever, they're really good at the mind, and physicians are really good at the body, but nobody touches the spirit, right? And the spirit is where a lot of these traumas are held, right? Especially when we're young and we don't have the cognitive ability. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day who's very into this type of cognitive therapy. It's like, well, what if you have a 5-year-old who was abused by their mother, like physically abused by their mother, and they don't have a story? It's like,
they don't.
And that pretty much floored them.
They won't have a story.
Well,
they won't have a story.
So it's just one of those things. So yeah, I'm going to collaborate with you, because I think that you are a puzzle piece put together. I think, so I think when you do all these different therapies, we have to talk about this, is that, what did help you the most out of all these things? I mean, we'll get to my book and all that sort of stuff in a minute, but what do you think helped you the most at this point? Brain spotting seems to be a big one.
I am unrelenting at solving myself.
I get it.
I go all the way, all the time. I have the intensity and the passion to solve any person's stuff. You bring me anything and I'm like, oh, I'll break it down.
Yep.
Let's just lay it out.
You're a detective.
I can see where the trauma is. I can see where the thing is. But when I was a kid, I had it wrong. I wanted to solve crimes of people that had been, murdered or whatever, which was terrible. But what I was missing is like, and even community college, I was taking all these psychology classes, and I had this professor, and she was like, what do you want to do with your life? I'm like, I don't know. I have no idea. And she's like, I've not had a student like you. You have taken this class and you just pick these concepts up after one reading. You know more in one semester than some people have known in 2 years of taking psychology classes. And why don't you do something with it? And I was young. I was like 17. I didn't know anything. I didn't listen. I was like, nah, I don't know yet. I'll figure it out. I still had a lot of my mom in me, where she was like this total mess, unorganized, terrible with money, an absolute disaster. And it turns out I'm the opposite. I am much like my dad. He's very organized, tidy, military, gets it done. very to the point. No BS with him.
And but the thing about that, I'm going to interrupt you. But the thing about, because I had those two poles too. Like I had my mother who was this very reserved, Glasgow registered nurse, everything was by the rules. And then I had my dad who was brilliant, like just so smart and playful and funny. And so the two of them were just like, how did you guys get together? Because you're so different. Like they're so different, the two of them. So yeah, it's like, I think we do assimilate the two of them together. And then we find because I'm a puzzle solver too. That's why I became a doctor. So, we get this thing like, how does this fit together? This is why I want to talk to you. Like, how does brain spotting fit in with IFS? And how does that fit in with SE? And how does it all sort of come together? Because I'm sure you've got a lot of stuff to teach me.
Oh, I think it could go both ways, right? I mean, I'm a student of all things that you've ever put out. I've listened to, I think, every podcast of yours with the exception of the last couple of weeks because I've had work has been very busy, which I don't usually care if it's busy or not. It's not going to take away from my learning because that's my favorite thing in the world.
Yeah, me too.
But I think for me, it had to happen the exact way it happened, right? I had to try CBT and that didn't work.
Yep.
DBT, meh. Okay, it kind of helped some things. And then me seeing to myself, I keep seeing these patterns. I keep seeing the same things come up. And I'm tired of interacting with these same maladaptive patterns over and over and over again. I'm tired of this. There cannot be the only way. So then it was like, okay, now what? What am I going to find and try next? So then I get into the IFS, and IFS helped me understand that there were fractured parts of me, and there still are many of them that have to be integrated, right? And it was like that opened my mind to, oh, this makes more sense for me. I understand more about myself now, right? Which gave me another layer of, oh, well, now what? What's next, right? So the EMDR didn't work. So then the brain spotting was like this gateway drug to okay, this works. This is amazing because I don't need safety. I just need a therapist. Well, in that constellation, let me roll that back for a second because you do need safety with the therapist.
Sure.
Because if you tried to do brain spotting with somebody you didn't trust, I think your body would throw up all the resistance it could possibly come up with and shut it down.
Agreed.
Because if you're not safe with your therapist or you're not safe with your coach or whoever you're working with, that's for people like us, we got to have something besides a pet, right? I know for you, it's pets. For me, it's pets. It's dogs. Like the dogs are my thing.
Yeah.
And people, not so much, but the pets I can get into. But to put that, all together, I think the next layer of that for me would be healing the attachment trauma. And that is like the big scary monster that's in the room right now. Yeah. That's the part where I'm like, oh God. Oh my God. And I still have the anxiety and the panic of like, what if the brain spotting doesn't work? Then what? What do I try next? What's the next thing on my list? Do I, because brain spotting is considered a type of somatic experiencing. And it is. It's all very
absolutely.
We go in here, this unlocks, and then you're down in your body, and then you get to process all the stuff. But there's just this immense fear in my system still about, I've had terrible relationships. My ex-husband was just like my mother. One of the biggest parts of my healing journey was writing. I'm a poet. I write poetry. I go to open mics. I put my rage to paper, and I wrote lots of rage poems over the summer. And then I wrote lots of poems about love and about other things in life. So that was a huge gateway for me to open up more layers, right? But I'll tell you, if I hadn't have done the brain spotting, I wouldn't even know how to sit with what's below the anger, what's below the thing, and be like, oh, that's grief. But what is the grief actually from? Like, because you could say, oh, I just feel grief. But it's like, where's it coming from? I mean, mine was pretty specific. It was like, I lost a parent. I lost a spouse. I lost another parent. My stepdad passed away right after the court thing finally ended. He died 2 weeks after that. So he passed away. And losing in-laws and a family that was a part of my stability that just became, it was no more. My ex-husband made sure to pull the pin out of the grenade and that too, and make it so that they were turned against me. And the whole thing was just quite ugly. But the MBRX program was so important because that was actually the first gateway point for me. Well, the book was the first gateway point. That taught me about all these modalities. It blew my mind about ego states, and it sent me down this whole trip of like, this is where my brain likes to be. Oh, this is exciting to me. I love learning about this. I love absorbing it. And I don't do well by reading, so I listen to books, and I can listen to, 2 or 3 books a week. And most of the time I could recite the entire book back to you and give a pretty good synopsis of what it would be about. And so then I listened to this book, and I listened to it 5 times that summer. I spent most of the second to 5th time on the ego states chapters over and over, just listening to them, repeating them over and over. Because for me, the repetition is like how my brain starts to remember, oh, we need to do this instead of this thing. It didn't stick right away. It took like another year to really stick. And then I did, the MBRX program came out, and I did that, loved it. It was like, woohoo. And I was in a relationship at the time. It was like my first relationship after the marriage. And that's when I realized I have this horrendous relationship anxiety. I mean, unbelievable. The worst. It's like my anxiety went from here to like way up here.
Sure.
And it's like, oh, there's still so much unresolved trauma from my marriage. There were things that happened in that relationship that were unspeakable. And there's also this pile of under that, the unspeakable stuff still happened with my mom, right? So I processed a little chunk of it, right? Yep. And so I've still got this mountain to go to get to the rest of it.
But at least you know that you can process it. That's what I see. Like people say in the horrendous states of alarm, but once they start seeing, they could be like 100% alarm, but once they start going into even 5% better, they're like, oh, I can get better. I'm not defective. So many people I've talked to said, I've been through all these therapies and all this stuff and nothing works. So they come to the conclusion that they're defective. Right. Which is a lot, which on some level too, many of them got that reflection from their parent. You're defective. You're not good enough. You're not going to do this. So it snowballs on itself. But once you start seeing like, hey, you know what? I do have some control over this. I can actually connect with the younger version of me. I can start seeing that I am a, quote unquote, good person. Right. Once you start cracking that shell, everything else kind of starts to open up at that point, because so much of the negativity relies on the previous negativity and the fact that you can't get out of it. It's like the story I tell in the book about the guy who hits himself with a hammer all day. And he says, well, why? He's asked, like, why do you hit yourself with a hammer all day? It's like, well, because it feels so good when I stop. So when you stop doing what you're doing, what the automatic negative, this is what I'm doing with the no complaining October, is that when you stop doing that, it opens up space for better stuff to kind of come in, and that becomes the habit. So your brain, whatever you focus on, you get more of. And I say that in the book so many times, and the book is a bit repetitive, and that's one of the things.
And it's supposed to be though, but that's how it's designed, and it should be that way.
And that's why I wrote it that way, because it's like you can write a book on anxiety and you can tell people and they can read it and they close it and it's like, yeah, that was awesome. And then 2 months later, they don't remember anything of it. The reason why my book can be annoying is that, it's repetitive. And I tell people, like, when you start getting a bit annoyed at the repetition, that's a great sign, because it means you've internalized the whole message that what you're dealing with is more of a state of alarm in your body that your mind is trying to make a confirmation bias of. So you feel this negativity in your body, and your mind says, okay, well, we feel this negativity. It must be this. It must be my relationship. It must be my job. It must be this stuff. And then of course that, becomes this confirmation bias and then creates more alarm, and you never get out of that cycle until you really realize. And then I was listening to Esther Perel the other day, who I love. And she was saying, about uncertainty is just grasping what you don't know. I can't remember exactly what she said, but I remember putting it in my thing. But keep chatting, because I want to be able to sort of get that, because it was such an important thing. Yeah, you go ahead.
What came to mind when you were talking about clients who were coming to you and saying nothing has worked?
Yes.
Whenever I hear that, my first thought is always the same, and maybe it could be a little projection, but I always think is, are they just stuck in victimhood?
Yeah. A lot of the time that's true.
Right. Are they stuck in the land of like, oh, it's easier to not go, to stay here and not go here, so that I can say, oh, it didn't work for me.
It's like more familiar. Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't.
Exactly.
I change nothing. I would change about that except easier to familiar. It's more familiar to stay in that.
Yeah,
because it's very hard for people to go outside of familiarity because we equate familiarity with security as children. So if you're yelled at by your father, you often will seek people in your life that will kind of metaphorically yell at you. Okay, here's the Esther thing. So Esther Perel says that curiosity is an active engagement with the unknown. I just love that. It was like I pulled the car over and said, I send myself a text about that kind of stuff. So it's that's one thing about trauma is that we hate the unknown. And the reason why we worry is because worry makes the uncertain appear a little more certain. So if you have this pain in your gut and you go, oh, it must be stomach cancer like my Uncle Bob had. Oh my God, I'm going to die. Oh, that's a horrible thought. But it does in the brain, it makes sense. So we get a little dopamine shot into the nucleus accumbens that says, okay, well, you're on the right track, So that's one of the reasons. There's a number of reasons why we get addicted to worry, because it does for about 0.4 of a second. It does make us feel better, right? Yeah. But then we believe, oh, now I've got stomach cancer, and then your body goes into deeper physiological alarm. So now you have to redouble your worry to try and get back to that same place. So we get into this place where we just can't get out of the worry. And it's just like what you're describing with the brain spotting is that, okay, I can stay in the worry. I can stay in the sensation of worry without adding a whole bunch of subjective explanations to it. And that's what I come up with.
Adding BS to it. BS Absolutely. It doesn't make any sense, right? Like that's not going to help me. Catastrophizing, because really what's happening is we're in some kind of cognitive distortion, right? We're thinking what you call them, the what ifs, the worst case.
Yeah, warnings, what ifs, and worst case scenarios.
There you go.
Yeah.
Those three. And it's really just one form of cognitive distortion or another. And there's a whole list of cognitive distortions. People, if they're curious, can go search and just look for cognitive distortions and find a whole list of them. And it's really interesting to start seeing yourself from that, oh, wait, that's catastrophizing. Oh, that's black and white thinking, or that's whatever the other ones are, right? It's just the two that come to mind. And then you're like, wait, if I'm there, then I'm not here.
Exactly.
I'm not here.
Yeah.
And the sooner you start to see that, the faster you get back here and the less you live here, which means you have less anxiety, which means your nervous system starts to slowly deactivate. And I also do, so this was another missing piece I added in recently. I do a lot of nervous system work. I do what they're called portals. It's like somatic exercises to access safety for a burned out nervous system. And mine is like, I've been struggling with burnout for years, not just because of the job thing, but just in general, just this heavy, intense amount of burnout. And the portals help like sort of bypass the, oh my God, the gas foot stuck on the gas pedal. Okay, we're taking it off the gas pedal. Okay, we're going to let it come down. We're going to settle. And you do those enough times and your body starts to realize, oh, okay, yeah, we just had an activation, but we're still safe. We can come back down instead of staying on. And part of what, I think is another layer to that anxiety piece is, where's the nervous system at?
Yeah.
What state are we in? Are we in, and you talk about this, fight, flight, fawn, or freeze, right? And I don't know if you're familiar with Pete Walker. I think you are, right?
Yeah.
His work on, he goes really deep into fawn, which a lot of people didn't for the longest time consider one of the nervous system states, and trauma activate, how
I actually added one more F to that, which is follow, because here's an interesting thing with that was that, we noticed that in females, when they get a stress response, they get an oxytocin boost that men don't get typically, right? So this could be the reason why when women are in stressful relationships, they get this whack of oxytocin. So what their oxytocin will tell them to do is love this person that's abusing them, or at least connect with them, or at least be empathic towards them. Whereas with men, it's like, well, no, you're abusing me. They're much more likely to move to aggression. Women are much more likely to do this. I think it's Shelley Taylor. I think it's her name. She's a PhD. Women go into this tend and befriend thing when they get stressed.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, it's just a theory of which, it seems like you and I have a million of them, but it's just like that might be an explanation as to why women when they go into a stress response, actually get a lot of oxytocin from the stress response as well.
Oh, so, yeah, it's like the definition of a trauma bond, right? Yes. Like my ex-husband and I were that verbatim, right?
I've had a couple of those myself, Michelle.
You know, we would have some interaction or whatever, and it was typically always around alcohol. Mm-hmm. And, you know, he would blow up and I couldn't handle the blow up, and then I would retaliate because it was like, you're not going to treat me like this. You're not going to talk to me. But my mom and I had the exact same dynamic. So of course I was addicted because in my child brain says, if I let go, I lose attachment. Yes. So as you say, all anxiety is separation anxiety, right? And I've even read recently in people who have relationship OCD or even sexual orientation OCD that what is really activating the OCD in their body is the exact same concept you're talking about. It's this separation from self. It's getting acted out as, oh my God, I'm going to lose attachment. Yep. Oh my God, this is how I'm going to lose my partner. I'm going to lose my spouse here. And with my mom, it was like, I'm going to lose my primary caregiver. And that blueprint got imprinted on me, of course. So I ended up in the same dynamic with a partner, and it got played out the same way until I was like, I am no longer playing this dynamic out. I'm no longer entertaining this. This is finished. And it was very hard to leave.
Yes.
And the leaving on my end had its own layer of toxicity that on my part that I owned up to. But I got out. It didn't matter how, I'm out. And here we are 2 years later, and I still suffer from what they're called nocturnal panic attacks. I wake up with these panics every morning. The alarm is like in the morning.
I have a theory about that. Why? Well, I think what happens is when we grow up in these environments that are very tense and we're sort of on edge all the time. Mm-hmm. Like we're always waiting for the other shoe to drop. When our muscles relax, there's a place in our brainstem called the oligopontine nucleus. And what happens with that when we fall asleep, that paralyzes our muscles. When our muscles are paralyzed, they're relaxed. So what happens is when we have relaxed muscles, our system goes, it's not safe to be relaxed. So when we wake up and we have these relaxed muscles, our automatic reaction is to freak out. And then our brain just goes over and over and over the horrible things that could go wrong or what's happening. So it's really about this thing that you're talking about earlier is with the therapist is being able to establish that safety first thing in the morning that you do with your brain spotting therapist. Like, can you reproduce that without having the therapist there?
Yes, because and I have been able to figure out how to do that using the somatic exercises. So really, they're not complicated. It's like you put your hand behind here, you look left, you look right, 1 minute each side. I do something called the gentle trauma release technique. I don't know if you're familiar with that. I learned that from my IFS coach. It's a way to stimulate the vagus nerve. It's like a rocking and soothing motion. You count to 10. There's a whole sequence. I can send you information on it if you want to share it, with the community. And I do legs up the wall.
Yeah, that's a great one.
I have to be very careful for me because any type of breath work for me has turned out to be not the best approach. I know a lot of people swear by it. Yep. For me, it creates more activation, more fear, more terror, more shutdown. When I stopped doing the morning breath work, that's when things started to change. When I started doing somatic exercises, not breath work. Now, I might lay in bed at night and control my out breath. Mm-hmm. But like if I do, the sigh, the 2 in and sigh. Out, physiological sigh. If I'm already dysregulated, I can't go anywhere near breath work. Out. If I'm mostly regulated and I feel like I want to move energy out and I'm not a level 10 on the nervous system outrage scale, I'll do some breath work. I'll do the sigh and that kind of stuff, and it'll help. But if you're in that horrible state of dysregulation, that's when I'm like, don't with the breath work. Don't with the ice baths. Don't with the things that we know. Yes, we want to do these things and they might help. But when we're in that acute stage and our nervous system is just on edge, and you know what it feels like? You're like up here, you want to bite everyone's head off, even the dog. You're like, no, I can't. You can feel everything in your body and it doesn't feel good.
Okay, weird question. Did you have a near drowning experience when you were young?
No.
Okay. Just sometimes when I see this, and did you have asthma growing up at all?
Yes.
Okay. So sometimes when I see this pattern that breathing is coupled with stress, it's really interesting because, the breath is one of the best ways or most efficient ways of actually connecting directly with the parasympathetic nervous system. But if people have coupled breath like a near drowning experience or being suffocated or smothered or something, like if someone like held something over your face where you couldn't breathe, then that overrides just about everything. So breath work. So when people tell me that breath work is one of those things that freaks them out, it's like, I always ask them, did you have a near drowning experience? Did someone try to suffocate you? Did someone, were you, abused and that sort of stuff?
I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe.
Exactly. So that's the kind of stuff that, we go into, and it's like, okay, can you, when you're feeling regulated, can you start of going into some breath work and sort of see what happens? So there's no point in doing breath work when you're revved up, as you said.
Nope.
Right?
Yep.
But is there a point in doing breath work when you're actually feeling pretty good?
Yes, there is.
So
I've
then
done it, and it's fine.
Yeah. So then it's kind of like, okay, now you can start that. The good breath work will start bleeding into the old breath work and sort of allowing you that avenue, because it's so important. It's so important in vagus nerve regulation. But again, something we really haven't talked to, because we could probably talk for 8 hours, is this connection with your child. I'm just wondering if you've done the yoga nidra in the MBRX, and what do you
find from that? I did it every night for like 7 months.
And what did you find from that?
I still had the nocturnal. I still had this this ragey panic when I got up, but I think that was one of the ways that a lot of my stuff went from subconscious to conscious.
Yes.
I think that's where the transition happens for me.
I agree.
And I always fall asleep. I can't remember a time I ever did the yoga nidra where I did not fall asleep.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's sometimes a trauma response too, because it gets you into this place where you dissociate, because being relaxed, and I hope over the next couple of years or so, Michelle, that you'll be able to trust, you'll be able to feel safe, feeling safe.
Yeah.
Right? Because I think that's where you're going as well. My concern is that you're so smart that you're going to go into the intellectual experience of feeling safe rather than the emotional feeling of feeling safe, right?
Yes.
So it's just like, if you remember anything that Dr. Kennedy said, is just like, okay, because your intellect is so powerful that it will draw you that way. And it did for me for many years. I tried to figure it out because I'm a doctor. He's like, all the neuroscience, I tried to figure out. And I know, like I said, a lot of the pathways in the brain, the anterior cingulate cortex and all that kind of posterior cingulate, all that stuff. I know that stuff, but it didn't really help me understand. What I think it does do is it really helps my patients or my clients, whatever you want to call them these days, is it's like, I'm not a freak. Like if I look at your anterior cingulate cortex, it's probably going to be smaller than the average, if I MRI'd you or whatever. If I looked at your hippocampus, it's probably going to be a little smaller. Although those of us with anxiety, this is the other thing, is that it's amazing. They say, well, cortisol impairs the hippocampus, and hippocampus is involved in memory. It's amazing how good my people with anxiety, how good their memory is. How much that they can retain material. Like even with me in med school, like they gave us so much stuff, and I finished really well in med school. And it's kind of like, that's always amazed me. It's like, oh, well, if my memory isn't supposed to be that good, maybe I'm a freaking genius. And what would it be like if I didn't have this? Maybe I'd be like in the Einstein level. It's like that kind of stuff. But I've always kind of maintained that I'm not brilliant intellectually. My father certainly was. But what I have is a combination of this sort of somatic understanding and the scientific explanation. And I think that's kind of, I think my appeal to a lot of people is that I can kind of bring these scientific concepts into something that where you can actually feel it and feel like you're a normal person who experienced an abnormal situation. And this is how your brain has reacted. It's reacted, the alarm is completely normal for the situation. It's like, but now how do we sort of incrementally, and Cynthia, my wife, would say this, it's like we need safety in order to sort of build that place. So when it's not safe to feel safe, we can't heal. We can learn a lot intellectually about stuff, but we don't heal. So it just sounds like you're kind of on the precipice of like, okay, I'm just opening up. So the only thing that I would say with you is like, you're so smart. So just, but feel, like, just allow yourself.
Yeah,
like,
don't forget to feel.
Can you use that smartness? And this is what I do too. Can I use that smartness? Like, yeah, it's fun to sort of go through the different tracks of the brain, but can you use that as a way of kind of seeing it in color? Like sometimes I'll see the tracks that go through the default mode network and that kind of thing. And it's like, okay, cool. Can you see that in a nice little panoramic rainbow color scheme, rather than having to know that this path goes into this and this path goes into that? It's like, can I bring this into a more tactile, unconscious feeling sense? Then, because I think a lot of us, and I picked this up with you as well, we make ourselves feel better with our intellect, right? And it's become a habit, right? And it's become a habit. But the thing is, but the thing about that is that there is an endpoint to that. There is only so much thinking that you can do to make yourself feel better. And it's bridging those two things together, is trying to get into that. Yes, thinking is good. Good thinking is good. But if we lean too much on the cognitive, we're not actually getting into that sort of limbic, unconscious place that you describe with the psychedelics, because that's what the psychedelics do. They take us out of our rational mind, and they put us into this sort of more limbic feeling state, which for some people, especially me, like when I did ayahuasca, it was terrifying, because I spent so much time, using my intellect to protect me. And then I take the substance that just wipes out my intellect. I have no intellect. I have no buffer anymore. And it just, rips me apart. So, it's understanding that. So is there anything you want to, like, we're getting close to the end here. Like usually I don't go quite this long, but I mean, we could probably go on for hours. But is there anything that you have found that my stuff or whatever has helped? What's helped you the most, like, move out of this situation that you've had in your life?
The brain spotting.
Okay.
And it just occurred to me to use exactly what you just said, to sort of depathologize myself a little bit, and saying, I study patterns in myself, and then I see those patterns in other people, and then I start to build like a library of, these are human patterns. Okay. And what I thought about was like how to take the thinking part of the pattern, which is me. Oh, I see this happening again. Okay. I'm going to write this down. I'm going to sketch it out. I'm going to process map it. But then what I'm going to start doing is I'm going to turn it into a poem. I'm going to make it something that's not so intellectualized. It's just an output of energy related to the emotions that are tied to the pattern, and see if that has a different output, which I've already been doing, but I hadn't thought to actually to use the patterns themselves as like subjects for the poetry. Like I think that's the next thing I'm going to try. But for me, the brain spotting was because I didn't have to have a safe place. I could just go in, have a safe therapist. And if you've got a safe person in the room, then you can just, everything will come to you. The feelings, the thoughts, the memories, the pain will come to you. And if you're tough enough and you can handle it, and I always tell people, just stay with it. I know you're scared of it, but staying stuck is way worse than that muck that you might sit in for 30 minutes in a therapy session. And maybe you have to sit in it a few times, but you're going to not have to sit in it forever, which means that this stuff up here is going to slow down. We're going to slow you down just a little bit at a time each time you sit in this. So you're subtracting the bad and gaining the good, the muck. That's the good stuff, right? And so that's my message to people, is if they can just stay in it long enough, that's the healing. That's the work. And if they can find some kind of outlet for it, whether it's writing, poetry, singing, dancing, something, anything that involves putting yourself out there in a way you haven't done before, even if people don't like it. Screw them.
Mic drop. Yeah. And it's really what you're describing is typically like right-brained activity. I mean, the lateralization of the brain has been kind of, beaten to death in a lot of ways. But poetry is one of those ways that the left brain and the right brain communicate. So poetry is getting the feeling from words. Left brain's very linguistic, and it understands words very, very well. And then when you put it into poetry and you put it into a group of words together that maybe hasn't been put together before, there is a different feeling with that. And it's really about the feeling. And, you know, the only proviso I put on what you said is like, if someone's had like severe emotional, physical, sexual abuse, you need some help with that. Like you can't sit with that for too long. Right.
No.
So you really do need someone to help you with that. But really, again, is like, how can we use our conscious directed minds and sort of work into the unconscious where these things are? And I always say you can't think your way out of alarm or anxiety. You have to feel your way out. You know, you got to feel it. And that's exactly what it is. And it takes time. It is one of those things that you really have to be patient with it. And if you find a therapist or you find a type of therapy like brain spotting or whatever that works for you, then slowly work with that. Because I do see people find, oh, this works for me. I'm going to do 10 sessions of this in the next 4 weeks. And
go slow.
It's like, exactly. Because the brain takes a while to assimilate. You know, I work with people in Europe who are kind of high level business people and sports people and that sort of, and they want to get better fast. It's like, it's like, no.
Oh, well, of course they do.
But the slower you do this, the more likely it's going to stick and stay. You know, I can change, I can help heal your alarm very quickly, but it's still this sleeping giant that's there. So it's better to do it in an incremental fashion where you sort of steadily feeling safe. And then as you get that felt sense, then the other stuff kind of just opens up behind it. So it does. It does. You know, it's like the hourglass thing. There's only so much sand you can fire through the middle of part of that hourglass at one time, right? So if you look back, there's a lot of sand at the bottom of it, but it's taken a while before it goes through there. So that's I keep getting the message of an hourglass for you. I'm not sure exactly what that comes from, but
I'm going to go get one. I'm going to put it on my desk.
There you
go. Always think of our conversation.
There you go. So Michelle, it's been great chatting with you. This has been
a
wonderful.
pleasure. I've been looking forward to this all week. This has been the highlight of actually my whole month. I've been like, oh my God, I'm going to be on Dr. Kennedy's podcast.
There you go.
Oh my God.
Where's that? And I have a feeling I'm going to have you back again because there's so many things that I wrote down to touch on and that kind of stuff too. Because I have a feeling that we could talk forever and just you're an assimilator, as am I, you know, so it's like, oh, we can take this and then we take this because there's so many of these kind of, I don't want to use the word disparate, but you know, if you look at like, you know, psychotherapy and then SE and then brain spotting and then IFS, there's so many different types of therapy. And really, I think they all have good points. It's just a matter of like, how can you take the best out of each one and ground them into a cohesive whole rather than just staying in their own little place. It's like the old thing about the Indian sage is like the 5 Indian sages and the elephant. Have you heard that story? Where there's these 5 Indian sages and one's holding the trunk. It says, oh, elephants are all about, you know, this. And then one's holding the leg. It's like, no, elephants are huge around it. So they're all right. It's just that if you go too deep into your own particular paradigm, you may be digging yourself into a hole and your client / patients into a hole too, because it's the amalgamation of stuff that seems to help people. And that's really what I got talking with you today. It's just, you know, create an amalgamation, take the best out of all these things and try and move forward with that. So we'll talk again, Michelle. That was amazing. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.